So for our hands-on project, we had performance appraisal, and that's going to be by Donnie Lamberson and Johnny Luna. And so to start off, I'm going to discuss the key principles background. The two primary concerns are objective and subjective concerns. For objective concerns, we had behavior, which is pertaining to what people do and where they choose to exert their effort. For example, this would be calling customers, writing orders, sales presentations, and follow-up communication. The second one's going to be performance, and this is behavior evaluated based on contribution to the organizational goals. And for example, this is going to be whether a person's behavior is good or appropriate based on company goals and objectives. And lastly, we have, for the objective concerns, we have effectiveness, which is the summary index of organizational outcomes for people partly responsible. For example, the sales volume, market share, customer retention, and profitability of sales. And the key issue in evaluating salespeople is the distinction among these three concepts. For example, role perceptions, aptitude, skill level, and motivation all directly linked to performance as well as to behavior. Behavior and performance are both impacted by sales activities. The big difference between performance and effectiveness is that effectiveness doesn't refer to the direct behavior, but to factors not controlled by individuals. And next, we're going to go over the two equations for objective appraisals. Equation one is going to be the ability equals task difficulty divided by the effort. And equation two is performance equals ability times effort plus or minus the task difficulty. According to the first equation, if two salespeople put forth the same amount of effort, the one who performs the more difficult task is expected to have the greater ability. And if two salespeople accomplish the same task with levels of performance, the one who expends less effort is expected by the rater to have the higher ability. According to the second equation, a sales manager's perception of a salesperson's performance is a function of ability times effort plus or minus the effects of the differing task. Next, we're going to cover the subjective concerns. The first one's going to be fundamental attribution bias, and this is the evaluation is about finding causes of the performance. For example, managers see why effectiveness worsened or bettered, so they know how to proceed. And the second is going to be outcome bias. An appraiser allows the outcome of a decision rather than the appropriateness. For example, managers encourage salespeople to make their own decision and believe those decisions will lead to a sale. However, in some cases, the manager may not have chosen the same option that the representative did choose. And the third one is going to be gender bias. And this is the increased ratio in women as salespeople. And this will change the ethics of professionalism. For example, studies have shown women have higher ethical standards, but are less ethical on topics such as a bad salesperson who had been fired. And next, I'm going to cover the appraisal element overview. So for the performance appraisals within the Excel file, there were 3 sheets. The first sheet's going to be your goals assessment. This sheet covered all 4 quarters in the year. We stated the salespeople's goals and then the actual numbers they hit and showed their total percentages achieved each quarter. Excuse me. And for the second sheet, this was the soft skills assessment. On this sheet, we had the salespeople rate factors on a scale 1 through 4, and we rated them as well. We showed their total ratings and their average ratings per quarter. And the last sheet is going to be action items. On this sheet, we chose 3 actions that will improve the salesperson's performance appraisal, and then we discussed the next steps needed. Next, we're going to cover the background of context. And so for the industries our salespeople cover is event management and property management. And the product market is going to be data individuals and selling data events, and then also multifamily housing. Next, we had for the sales strategy was to increase online sales through social media, closing deals with confidence, and nurturing existing accounts and residents. And for these strategy goals, this is the number of connections on social media to increase monthly revenue and also the achievement of renewal. Furthermore, we're going to talk about the salespeople's background. So for Cassidy Luna, her position is a community outreach manager for IQPC. And this is event management for Fortune 500 companies. And her primary job is to sell data and analytic portfolio exchanges to the leading executives in that primary field. And then for Christian Brown, his position is a leasing specialist for Edward Rose and Sons, and this is property management company with multifamily residencies in 17 different states. And his primary job is to sell and lease apartments to all eligible applicants while maintaining compliance with fair housing laws. For the first appraisal meeting, we had Cassidy, and she had unimpressive inputs, but she did have impressive outputs. And below in the description, we did put the link for the actual audio of our conversations for this person. And so on the first sheet, which is going to be the goal assessment, as you can see here, we have all 4 quarters, and we did put the 4 goals specifically pertaining to Cassidy. So her 4 goals is the deals closed, the calls made, her meetings booked, and then her new connections. And as you can see, for each quarter, she did hit her goal every single time as far as deals closed, and then also meetings booked, or she exceeded it on the majority of these quarters on each one. So as you can see here, so in the 4th quarter, she had actually 16 deals closed, and she only needed 12, and then 14 here, and so on and so forth. But if you see her input, so as far as her calls made, she is not making enough for each quarter. So here she needed 1,500 or so. The goal for each quarter is going to be the same for each metric. So for her calls, she needed 15. She got 1,000 here, 1,126 here. So each time she was not actually hitting that goal. Or the new connection, she needed 2,000 each quarter, and she wasn't hitting that either. But if you do see here, she did have fairly impressive a percentage of her achievement within her goals. So each quarter she did pretty good. The first one was 93, 88, 100, and then she exceeded it with 104. And moving on. For the second sheet within the Excel file, we had the soft skills assessment. If you look right here in the top right corner, we have the scale, and that was a scale 1 through 4. I had Cassidy rate herself a 1 through 4 for each of these rating factors that you see right here in the left in bold. And then I also rated her as well. So a quick overview of this, you can see that her time management skills have not been great throughout. She did improve a little toward the end. And then her communication skills verbally were fairly rough, but she did get better as time went on. And if you look at her ability to overcome objectives, that was a little rough, especially through the beginning, and she did recover that through the end. And then competitive intel, she didn't know a whole lot about her competitors or what exactly they do, or she knew what they do, but she didn't know their strengths and weaknesses. So that was rated kind of low here. But if you can see overall, she had a fairly rough quarter, the first quarter, and then things did look really good for the last 3 quarters, especially that last one there. And next, we have the third sheet in the Excel file, which is action items. And here I chose 3 actions that Cassidy could improve in order to improve her performance appraisal. And this is going to be to increase her call volume. The second action is going to be to increase her connections. And the third is to increase her time management. All of these things will bring her more commission as well as create more revenue for the company. Here we go. And as far as time management, as you could see on the slide before, her time management wasn't very great. And I say this because her goals, she was not hitting her goals for calls or for new connections. So she kind of was letting off the gas a little bit. She was hitting all her numbers and closing those deals and closing those or booking those meetings, but she wasn't necessarily hitting her goal of 1,500 each quarter. So that's why I had chosen these 3 action items. And that will conclude salesperson salesperson 1's performance appraisal.
When conducting the performance appraisal for salesperson 2, the first section is the goals assessment. When looking at the weighted totals for Christian, He remains consistent and overall hits his goals well. However, where he struggles is in his deals closed. Across the quarters, it is clear that he makes the calls and opens the opportunities, though. Where he struggles, like I said, is just making those deals closed. Thus, Christian has impressive inputs but unimpressive outputs. The next section is Christian's rating of himself versus my rating of him. He does incredibly well in sections like preparation, motivation, and his understanding of CRM, but struggles to overcome prospect objections and follow a close plan. All that said, in both ratings, he did improve as the year went on. Lastly, to improve his closing ability, I created a few different action items for Christian to complete. The first action item is the phone training, and specifically the closing phone training plan. The rationale for this is just to have him talk about the application for the apartment over the phone. That way it sets the tone for the in-person meeting. What I'm going to do to support Christian in this is attend the virtual training session with our director of marketing with Christian so that he feels supported in this. The measurement of success for this will simply be his calls made versus his applications from those who don't actually tour an apartment. The next action item is going to be the on-site closing training. So this is when the prospect is actually in the door and he does the tour and then he does his close process, which should be done at least 3 times. So the reason for this is because if applicants don't apply while they're on the site and on the property, they may not answer our follow-ups. They may ignore our calls and ignore our emails. So the on-site closing is very important because this may be the only opportunity that you have. What I'm going to do to support him in this is shadow Christian while he's on tours so he feels that he can be comfortable in doing the closing and that he doesn't sound like a pushy salesman. The last action item is going to be to do a secret shop of our competitors in the Fishers area. This will allow Christian to see how his competitors close. Some companies like JC Hart, Virgin Held, some companies like those, they don't actually try to do the close. And I want Christian to see this so that he understands why our close process is as important as it is. The action I'm going to support him with in this is just to have a follow-up meeting over the tour with the competitor. We're going to review this as a team and individually so that he feels like he understands his competition as best as he can. And this concludes the appraisal meeting for salesperson 2. Furthermore, these are items that my colleague and I did to avoid objective errors. The first one is holding more frequent performance appraisals. So we did them across 4 quarters, which is very frequent in regard to the frequency of these performance appraisals. What this does is reduce reliance on the memory of the manager, so it's more objective. The next section is using more objective ratings. So rather than jumping right to meet expectations on his performance evaluations, we go ahead and use things like completed number of calls to actually judge whether he met expectations for that specific plan. The next section is to implement a 360 feedback system. So what this does is lessen the individual rater bias and it allows him to rate himself as well. The last section is to just beware of the halo and horns effect. So this is just the idea of the ratings either being really high for salesperson 1 and 2 or really low. Lastly, I wanted to go over the subjective biases that my colleague went over earlier. These are ways that us as managers will avoid them. First, we have the fundamental attribution bias. What we're going to do for this is review the competitor sales for every week. This will allow the rater to understand contextual factors like peaks and valleys of the market. If our competitors aren't doing well, This may explain why we are doing well or we aren't doing well as well. The next section is outcome bias, and this will allow the rater to meet with the manager to go over the results. This will allow the manager to not just look at the results, but actually listen to the salesperson and go over why they made the decisions the way they did. The last section is to use gender bias. This is going over multiple individuals of different genders in the 360 feedback we talked about earlier. This allows all perspectives to be represented. And with that, we'd like to thank you for your time. If you do have any questions on our presentation, we'd love to answer them, and feel free to reach out.